New Year to you as well.
Now, I'm thrilled to just have, and especially for so many people joining us for our first Emerging Manager Roundtable of the year. Happy New Year, since I did not do one of these last month. I did one in December, so decided to go dark for January. So Happy New Year, happy Black History Month. And we're gonna let a couple folks trickle in just for a few more seconds, and then I'm gonna get started because we have Brian Bank here, and the folks who have been at the Emerging Manager Roundtable before know that Brian is very much a staple of our community. Like myself, a former LP who has more experience than I do and just showers us with wisdom every time he is here. So since we have so many new faces, and I do invite you to keep your cameras on, I'll be interviewing Brian until roughly 1-ish or so. And then we're going to do some networking and breakout rooms. So if you want to leave your camera on, feel free to. If not, that works as well. But I am just super excited to have so many folks here. I'm going to start by introducing myself. We're going to do super quick intro of Brian. And by super quick, I will probably just say his name again, where he works, and very briefly his title, so we can jump into questions. But I am Vonetta Young. I'm an investment readiness and fund formation advisor. I work with emerging managers to help them build their business and tell their story with the goal of their fundraise going further, faster, better. And I started the Emerging Manager Roundtable around this time last year. So happy anniversary, everyone. Because I think it's really important to be a part of community, especially in an industry where everyone faces kind of a lot of rejection, and it can feel very isolating. So giving folks an opportunity to come together to learn and grow together. So this month, my guest is Brian Bank. He's a non-lawyer from Kirkland Ellis, very long time strategist in investor relations. And I am just super, super happy to have him here. So welcome, Brian. Helen, if you find a way to pin me and Brian, that would be amazing. And if that doesn't work, no worries. I don't want to add any complications to this. So let's jump in to the first question, being, Brian, can you actually tell me what it is that you do? I know I just kind of spat it out, but not really. Because everyone hears Kirkland and Ellis, they assume that you are an attorney. You are not an attorney. And I just want to get a little bit more of a sense from you is what on earth you do.
How much time do we have? No, just joking. So thanks first of all for having me on, and Happy New Year, everyone. So as many of you know, Kirkland and Ellis is the largest law firm in the private equity space. The investment funds group is about 500 attorneys, only focused on fund formation and liquidity solutions. We also have about 150 tax and regulatory attorneys. As Vonetta pointed out, I am not an attorney. I am one of 2 client-facing non-attorneys within the group. I was hired about 5 years ago with the very specific job description to help our clients however I can. It is a role that leverages my 15, 16 years as both a placement agent and as an LP to advise clients on fundraising, on investor relations, on firm formation, how to create the entity, what you need from a building blocks perspective, who you need to meet, what service providers are helpful, how your messaging should look, what your deck should look like, what your LPA should read. I help advise on terms. If it's an existing firm, I help them think about investor relations matters, how to communicate better with their investors, how to think about fundraising, and frankly, anything in between: annual meetings, virtual annual meetings, in-person annual meetings, LPACs, secondary transactions. In certain ways, I'm a concierge into Kirkland as well. So it's a very all-encompassing role that's a lot of fun.
I love it. I love it. And I met Brian when my husband Rustin was a partner at Kirkland. He has since moved to greener pastures, but only in the sense that the companies are a little greener. So no longer doing he's now on the VC side, so tearing his hair out for different reasons. But one place I want to start, in terms of looking at fund formation and vendor selection, law firms being very important. Can we start there in terms of, when managers are looking for a law firm, what should they be looking for? And of course, people are going to be like, what's the cheapest I can get? But what else what are the other considerations they should be making?
No, it's a great question. I think it's related to almost every service provider. It's really reputational and experience. I think if you're an emerging manager, you're already facing a lot of hurdles with regards to the fundraise. You've got a lot of challenges in front of you. And one of the tasks you'll face is how to limit those challenges and how to create credibility in the marketplace among your prospect LPs. One way is working with service providers who are very experienced, who are very well known in the marketplace. Kirkland being one. Obviously, there are 4 or 5 other law firms, both in venture and private equity, that are very experienced in the space. Fees certainly will come into play. But at the same time, I think that it's important to recognize that you're building a foundation, and you shouldn't think in terms of your first fund, but you should think in terms of funds 3, 4 in the next 20 years. And are you better off establishing a relationship early with what might potentially be a slightly more expensive provider, but that provider is going to bring credibility, is going to be seen in the marketplace as a partner that will not create challenges down the road. And again, from a foundational perspective, it's not dissimilar to building a home. You want the right foundation, or else you're going to have to, tear it apart and start over down the road. What's more expensive? Working from something that's working or having to start over. So, it's obviously important to determine what the bandwidth is, what the experience is, what kind of track record that partner has with your specific strategy. Oftentimes, I speak with clients who have utilized counsel that are from a totally different strategy. So hedge fund, for example, is very different from a terms perspective and from a fundraising perspective than private equity or venture. Right. Venture is actually different from buyout. So it's important to really understand the team that you're going to be working with, their experience with your particular strategy, their bandwidth. And again, we're all seasoned, experienced professionals, and life's too short to work with people you don't want to work with also, and people you don't like. So it's really important, in my opinion, to have a good rapport and really feel comfortable. A good lawyer is the first phone call you're going to make. The law firm is going to be an advisor to you. And our view at Kirkland, and my view personally, is that we really are that first step into the world, frankly. And if the relationship works well, we're going to work with you on your M&A. If the M&A is working out well, we're going to work with you on debt finance. We're going to work with you on IPO. You guys are all going to become hugely successful. So you're going to need trust in the state's help. You're going to need exit help. So, the relationship really should be something that's very, very stable, very familial, very comfortable. We want to be with you for 20 years, and that's how you should be with all your service providers.
And you've kind of, you said something that hit a little too close to home for me. We actually did find that we do have cracks in the foundation of our home. So, so please pray for us. That was an expense we were not expecting, especially
I just found lead-based paint in mine. So I feel your pain.
Oh, home ownership. As managers think about, they need attorneys, they need a fund administrator, they need accountants, they need insurance. How do you, how should they think about allocating funds and resources to these things? Do you have any kind of tips or rules of thumb for them to think about, they only have so much money. How much do they apply to each of these things, all of which are necessary?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, I mean, a lot of what I said a few minutes ago applies here from a credibility perspective in the marketplace. What's important to note is that this outsourced service provider concept has become the norm among LPs, and LPs want to see third-party providers of some of these services, whereas in the past it was in-house. So, from an expense perspective, it does start adding up. I mean, I'm not negating that fact,
right,
but it is an expectation that a third-party service provider is used from a fund admin perspective. If you don't have the capability to have an internal compliance officer, you need an outsourced compliance firm. That's expected. Auditing, counting, finance. These are functions that shouldn't be natural to you as founders of firms. And frankly, LPs would rather see you out doing what you're best at, which is identifying investments, making those investments and managing those investments. They don't want you wasting your time and frankly their money doing these services internally. So, I can't really speak to the budget. It's going to be, specific to each group. And, clearly if you're raising a $500 million fund, you've got a little bit more budget from a management fee perspective to spend on those things, as opposed to a $75 million fund.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. I guess kind of last brass tacks question is, how do you go about finding these people? There's approximately 8 million lawyers, many of whom do fund formation. There's, roughly 75 million accountants. How do you even find the right one?
Well, I mean, I think a forum like this is a great start. This is a people business. You need to understand, get referrals, have as many conversations as you can. Really talk to others who are, fishing in the same pond as you with regards to your strategy, your size. See who they've liked, see who they didn't like. I'm a big fan of speaking to LPs. So if you're trying to identify who the right fund administrator is, talk to LPs, find out what worked for them, what didn't work for them, what gaps in past services that you want to have filled, where was the dissatisfaction. So it's really a function of asking the good and the bad across all of these relationships and all of these references. As far as my day-to-day job goes, one of the things that I often do is make introductions to service providers. I don't limit it to one or two. I generally make 3 or 4, or in the case of placement agents, maybe 6 to 8 introductions. Wow. Frankly, because the service providers also need to be selective. They also need to evaluate the GPs from a fundraising ability perspective. And again, it's a personality match. So you need to make sure that you're speaking to enough groups that cross that line for you, that they are experienced, that they provide the credibility, that their service is being provided at a rate that you can afford, but also that, they have the time for you and you like them.
Yeah. And I think that is actually kind of an underestimated thing, knowing that people focus so much on price of, is this the cheapest option I can find? That kind of reminder that this is a people business is, I think, very, very necessary, because you're going to be in contact with folks kind of a lot. And so I should hope that you would like them to be in contact with them as much as you're going to be.
Yeah. And, it's easy for me to say that, it's important not to nickel and dime, but the reality is that really permeates everything that you do. Yeah. Vonetta, we've talked about this, and I think I may have mentioned this when I was speaking or answering or just chiming in one of these earlier sessions, is that, like, technology is a perfect example. People don't spend enough time ensuring that their home tech setup is right. And when you're thinking about fundraising and you're having LP conversations and you're speaking through the built-in camera and microphone on your computer, is that going to be the same experience as having a external high definition camera, having a better speaker, having better lighting? All the things that really will be memorable for an LP, for a prospect, are those little things. I mean, an LP will remember if, your system falls apart, if your system stops working, if it freezes, if the quality is bad, if the lighting is bad. All these things will reflect negatively. And unfortunately, that could be a differentiator between your ability to get them to write a commitment for you and not.
Yeah. Sobering point. And yet also really easy fixes, and advice that I have not yet taken. And duly noted, I'll go on Amazon for that damn external camera, which luckily my camera has stopped randomly shutting off. I keep saying I got this computer in like the summer of 2019. So it was just not expecting for the camera to be on anywhere near as long as it has been, or as much as it has been.
I don't think any of us did. Exactly.
I don't think so, but advice now well taken. I want to switch gears just a little bit. I have 1 to 2 more questions, and I really do want to encourage everyone to either pop your question in the chat or to unmic, because like I said, Brian knows it all. So yes, please ask your questions. The last or second to last, depending on how many other questions we have, is kind of going back to that point about this being a people business, I think, finance people tend to focus on numbers, but every LP I've ever known, including myself, has said, tell your story, tell me a story. What do they mean by that? And how do people who are inherently focused on numbers and deals tell a story? What does that mean, and how should emerging managers interpret that?
It's a great question, and I'm going to answer it slightly differently to start. I want to remind everyone in the audience to think about what an LP is and who an LP is. An LP is both an institution and a person, and the institution has a decision-making process, has strategies, has goals, has targets. The LP as a person might have very different motivations and different rationale for making an investment. And it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. So those individuals who are the portfolio managers, the actual decision makers, might not necessarily understand your strategy as well as you think they do. They might not necessarily feel comfortable explaining those strategies internally. So from a storytelling perspective, the challenge that I think every emerging manager, and frankly, every manager has, is being able to share the track record, share the story, give case studies that the gatekeeper, that portfolio manager, is able to understand and then able to articulate internally. Your goal is to create a champion. Your goal is to have a person on the other side of the table so enthusiastic about your strategy that they can't wait to tell their colleagues. They can't wait to explain how great these investments have been, why I need to invest in Vonetta's fund as opposed to Brian's fund. LPs generally are looking for reasons to say no as opposed to reasons to say yes. It's very, very easy for someone sitting in the LP seat to say no. They're never going to get fired for saying no. They will get fired for making bad decisions and having to explain why terms, why teams, why there are anomalies in the story. So it's important from a storytelling perspective to bring it down to the basics, to be as clear. I hate to use the term dummying something down, but you really do. And in many ways, I say you need to make it understandable for your grandmother. And, my grandmother was a pretty bright person, but, the reality is that there are investment entities that do have oversight from people who are completely outside of the strategy in that industry. And, all of us are guilty of being very deep in our own weeds, right? I've had conversations. I've been in the industry for 25 years, and I continue to try to understand crypto, for example. And I will have conversations.
Right. I gave up a long time ago.
And I have conversations with crypto managers all the time, and I review their decks, and they're trying to explain to me, this is the deck that we're going to market with. And I continually tell them they need to take the esoteric out. They need to dummy it down, make it understandable, make it as clear as you possibly can. I also use the term take Wall Street out of the decks. I mean, the number of managers who spin out of Wall Street to launch their own firms, and they've been on the street for 20 years. They know their industry cold. There's no question. They've got great deal experience. They've got great track records. But that doesn't necessarily transfer. That's not a story that articulates well in middle America, or with some family offices, or some people who haven't spent 20 years on the street. I mean, some of these strategies are incredibly esoteric. I've spoken with clients of with hundreds of billions of dollars of AUM, the biggest firms that we all know and love. And I've helped them, kind of dummy down their PPMs, because again, I said, look, this is something that no one will understand outside of Wall Street. So the story is critical, and related to the story being critical is that differentiation. When you're meeting people and you're an emerging manager, and in this environment, meeting online via Zoom, it's really, really difficult to be differentiated. And I hate the word differentiated because everyone says they're differentiated, but the reality is it's going to be that much more of a challenge to stand out from, and not be a Jambo, just another mid-market buyout firm. So you need to really try to connect, tell stories that are memorable. Think about portfolio companies that are better than others, that stand out, that are memorable. Is it a brand? Is it a product that people will know? In a prior life, I was invested in the early stages of Method soap. Everyone knows Method home product.
Of course.
And that was a great story because it was tangible. Everyone knew what it was. I could explain that, the first time I met these guys, they were mixing chemicals in their bathtub in San Francisco. And, it obviously had a good outcome, but that's a story that people can remember. An esoteric microchip company, it's going to be hard to remember.
Yeah. Unless you tell me that microchip was inserted in a dog who was found in the middle of a rainstorm by a 5-year-old orphan. And then I'm like, okay, I need to buy those microchips.
Exactly.
But no, I think that makes a very good point, is that, LPs are people. And one thing that I tell folks is, LPs highly respect the fact that you're a deal person, but they might not be deal people themselves. They might be people like me, who I was an English major in undergrad, who was like, oh, finance sounds really interesting. Let me go get an MBA. And I intentionally went the route that was very people focused rather than a more quantitative route. So really, showering me with the details and numbers of a deal, I will understand it. But telling me why it's important will be much more resonant. And like you say, I'm going to be much more inclined to remember it, largely because I was an English major, I'm a writer, I remember story before I remember anything. And frankly, it's actually just the way the human brain is wired as well.
Yeah, and it's actually important. It's a great point. And the other comment I would make is that as you're developing these relationships and as you're getting to meeting number 2, meeting number 3, meeting number 4, and hopefully annual meeting, it might be a different person sitting on the other side of the table.
Right.
So these comments, as you recall from our last meeting, or as you remember from last annual meeting, might not be applicable. So don't make the assumptions that they remember your strategy, that they remember your companies. Hopefully they do, but chances are they've probably met dozens of other managers in between. So they need that reminder. Don't take it personally, but also don't be presumptuous enough to remember to think that they remember everything that you've talked about.
Oh, very, very good point. We have one question in the chat that I want to see if, Brian, if you're able to answer, but please ask more questions. Feel free to come on video and unmute yourself. And so this question's from Bram. And Bram, if you want to put more color on this, you're welcome to. But, what's the kind of typical price range for VC fund formation and some, annual admin expenses? Bram, do you want to add more color to your question there?
No, not really. I mean, it's, just trying to get a sense as I'm in the early stages of raising a fund. So
yeah, unfortunately, I really don't have the finger on the pulse of that. I think there are probably some people on the phone here or in the Zoom here who are closer on the finance side who might be able to, but I can speak to the legal side a little bit from a Kirkland perspective, but from the others, I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah, just even from the legal perspective, it would be.
So, the range is going to be very wide. I mean, the range is going to be exceptionally wide from a legal perspective. The costs really start building up with all law firms in the fundraising process when it comes to the LP negotiation at the end of the process. The documents, I'm not going to say they're off the shelf, but they're pretty much off the shelf. You make some changes. You obviously make term considerations based on the specifics of the transaction. I think on the low end, some law firms can be as significantly below $500,000 from a full process perspective. We are not in that range. There are different levers that can be adjusted. In the case of Kirkland, it's important to recognize that we don't bill for our time until after the fund has been closed. So, we're in complete alignment with our GP clients that, clearly we're keeping track, clearly we expect to be paid, but until you receive management fees, it's just not, you're not going to pay us a lot. The other point worth considering is that there are what's called organizational expenses that can get charged back to the fund. And, within the limited partnership agreement in this process, they establish what a cap is. So we as a firm will say, okay, your organizational expense cap is going to be $2 million. So again, that's not out of your pocket, but those are fees that can get, can cover a lot of these fundraising related expenses.
Thanks. That's helpful. Thank you.
So what other questions do we have? I have one more for Brian, but I would much rather give the floor to someone who hasn't gotten a chance yet. Terry, I saw you unmute, but I don't know if that means you have a question or not.
I was looking for the hand raise button, but I can't find it. So good to see you again, Vonetta, and Brian. Thanks for jumping on. You made a comment earlier about the ability to potentially expense some of these, particularly outsourced services. Might be worth mentioning that a little bit in terms of how that market's evolved, where some of these external expenses can actually be put through as a fund expense. Some LPs are paying very close attention to that, and some probably aren't doing as good a job of that as they should be or could be. But curious your take on kind of the state of the art as relates to what the market is wanting to see in that regard.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the market is seeing it, and it's a function of, again, back to the sophistication or the experience level of both the LP council as well as GP council. I've had conversations with some very large established GPs that frankly hadn't even considered that, hadn't thought about, the fact that they can expense back to the fund certain expenses of fundraising. So it could be, travel related, it could be placement fees, it could be some of the legal fees. There are a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that good fund formation counsel will walk you through. And frankly, that good LP counsel will walk the LP prospects through. So, rather than go through it line by line, I mean, I think the reality is that it's something that a good fund formation attorney should put as part of the conversation and the establishing of the relationship. Those should be questions that you ask. What can I charge against the fund? It is important, though, from a regulatory perspective also, and again, it's best to work with a law firm that does have a regulatory function and capability to ensure that you're not spending money or expensing to multiple funds, or that the capital or the expenses are being allocated appropriately. As a first-time manager, the SEC is going to pay a lot closer attention to your activities. And it's very important to ensure that you're not crossing lines that will raise red flags with the SEC.
Right.
And that could be as simple as, from a fundraising perspective. I was looking through LinkedIn a few months ago, and a friend of mine who is not related to this industry, but apparently is now, highlighted a fund that he's associated with on his LinkedIn profile with past returns and their fundraising targets and all these things that would qualify, frankly, as mass solicitation.
Oh.
So I shot him a quick email, said, get this off your email, get this off your LinkedIn as soon as possible, and talk to your fund counsel, because as far as I know, this is, violating lots of SEC no-nos. And, it's just very, very important to ensure that you're not spreading your story too broadly without the right limitations put in place.
And Terry, you're getting me thinking about something, and Angela, it's very great to see you here, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you could speak to that LP perspective about, would do LPs feel comfortable seeing GPs charged to the fund? What are the kind of things that you're expecting them to put in their own pockets? And apologies for putting you on the spot, but since I saw you there, it's like, oh, maybe she can speak to this question.
Yeah, I'm going to have to circle back to you on that because I literally wrote that question down. I'm in the process of looking out our operations due diligence process to see what things are in there that we ask for, because a lot of the things that I've become aware of in doing this work for 5+ years now is how much GPs don't know and how much they rely on us as LPs to help them navigate, conversations. A lot of the GPs that we meet that are very early, especially particularly in venture, they don't know how to talk to investors. They don't know what they can reveal, how we're going to feel about what they're asking us, because a lot of them feel really green. But just because you're an emerging manager doesn't mean that you're a new investor, for instance. So first of all, thank you for giving me the floor. It's so great to see you all here, especially you, Vonetta, because I really appreciate discussions like this and the work that you're doing in the space. So let me circle back on that. There's a list of things. I actually have a call scheduled with our managing director and director of private assets. I'm asking him all sorts of questions, but I had a knee-jerk reaction to a lot of the things that Brian mentioned. For instance, there's some things that I would prefer to see that GPs need to know. If you're raising a fund, actually have a website, and actually have a website that goes somewhere, not something that you're still working on. If you're raising a fund, you should have a website. You should have your fund documents. If you don't have them all, to Brian's point, I know some attorneys that will get you to the point where you have enough so that you can go out, and fundraise and meet that first close, and then they can work on other things on the back end. So there's resources for that. Also have a point of view. Brian's right. You invest in human capital first. You invest in people. You talk to people that you like. So tell us your story. You can start from birth. We want to understand what brought you into this space, what allows you to pick the opportunities that you're seeing, to pick the people that you invest with. So start anywhere you like, because one of the things that jumped out at me, again, Brian's comments are so rich, is that I'm coming into this space as being a former HR person, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion is my jam. And so you don't realize how much you've taught me 5-6 years ago. Then I'm pitching to my team, hey, we should really do this. But here's why, right? Not only because I just like, David, for instance, or Jeffrey, right? But I really have to make a case, because we want to take that meeting, and then I'm really trying to get you to the second meeting. But in the process of me learning so much about various asset classes, what we look for, what's our criteria, because I look at hedge funds managers, fixed income, US, non-US, and all across private equity to include venture. So I have to know a little bit about a lot. So make sure you build your story, and like Brian said, don't be so esoteric, so Wall Street, like really bring it down to a level that's memorable. Storytelling. I'm also a writer. I love to tell stories because people remember stories. And so, think about other things. Outsourcing is great. We love that because we realize the chicken and egg problem. So don't shy away from that. Don't shy away from telling us about the impact that you're making in the communities in which you invest and in your portfolio, because everybody is paying attention to impact. And, the George Floyd murder, everybody wants to do something by way of diversity. Don't come to a meeting where you are meeting with crucial partners. We're an LP, for instance, and you're preaching to the choir. I'm looking for diverse asset managers, women and people of color, for us to, robustly, continuously grow our pipeline. But that's not the only managers that we look at. We look at all white guys together, and we believe that everyone can get a slice of the pie. But we're missing that diversity piece, right? So don't preach to the choir when I bring you my subject matter experts into the meeting. We get it. We know what impact you're making. Don't talk too extensively about diversity. Tell us what you're building, how you're building it, what you're planning for fund 2 maybe, and pay attention to those fund sizes. When you double that fund size coming from fund 1 to fund 2, be really cognizant about what the opportunities you're seeing and why you're doubling that fund size, because we want you to grow incrementally, but you have to be thoughtful about a lot of things. I'm just going to stop there because there's so much I can say.
Between Brian and Angela,
I could listen to that all day, by the way.
Gonna need to get my church band here, like amen to both of them. We got time for one last question, one from Tembi, who, hi Tembi, it's great to see you here. My former Abbott colleague who asked a very, very good question. And perhaps Brian and Angela, you might be able to speak to this because I am actually not sure of this either. So she said some GPs charge fees and expenses to their LPs outside of their commitments, and other times these fees are netted against commitments. Do LPs have discretion regarding how their fees are handled?
You guys are confusing me with a lawyer. My quick answer is probably not. I would think that there is little discretion if the LPA documents and the fund formation documents are written appropriately. That, you know, these are issues that will be negotiated back and forth by fund counsel, LP counsel. Unfortunately, in this market, especially for emerging managers, it's more of a seller's market. So the GPs can push terms more than the LPs can push terms. If there's flexibility, it's probably by accident. So, you know, again, if there are certain strategies from an expense perspective or certain things that LPs are interested in, I think it's really important to have those conversations with their counsel to really determine what they can push back on from a terms perspective. I mean, it's a commercial decision what terms are really worth fighting for and which terms aren't. When I spent 15 years as an LP, and you know, we would push back on things that we thought were important. And then others, I'd literally defer to my counsel, and they'd say, look, you know, it's just not worth it.
Ditto that.
Sorry?
I was going to say ditto. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. No, what I was going to say before we break into the breakout rooms, I just wanted to make one last comment, and I'm happy to, you know, speak to anyone at any point. I don't bill for any of my time. Kirkland loves me talking to whomever. Be patient in this process. This is a very challenging process for an emerging manager, for a first-time fund, even for a multiple fund. The market right now is incredibly difficult. The LPs, as Angela and others can speak to, have GPs coming to market much faster than they have in the past. They're coming to market with ancillary strategies and indirectly telling, or in some cases directly telling, their LPs that to maintain your pro rata in our prior funds and in our flagships, we expect you to commit to the new funds. The process is never a fun one for a first-time manager. For an emerging manager, 18 to 24 months for fundraising is standard. You're all incredibly successful people, and you're about to undertake a process where you'll be rejected more times than you've ever been in your entire life combined. So be patient, understand this is the process. Talk to others, talk to your therapist, talk to your spouses, talk to your partner's spouses. This is a piece that I think most people don't truly appreciate, which is you're leaving in a very successful, lucrative role in many cases to start your own thing. You're going to have no salary. You're going to be rejected a lot for the next 18 months. Your spouse may be comfortable with that, but is your partner's spouse? Are the other family members of your colleagues prepared for this as well? And it's important to really understand that everyone's in alignment, everyone's on the same page, everyone's both financially and emotionally stable. The benefit of the COVID situation, as all the placement agents on the phone on this Zoom can attest to, is that we're not on the road all the time, that, you know, you are not away from family as much as you would have been 2 years ago. But that doesn't change the fact that this is going to be a very long process for you. And you know, I've had many conversations with clients who, you know, have had their first close and they say, God, this is the longest process. I said, congratulations. The clock just started ticking for the next 12 months. The clock starts when you have that first close. It doesn't start. It doesn't stop.
Right.
So know what you're walking into before you start this process.
Exactly. And think of yourself as a writer. The number of us who are out there just trying to get our books out, and you see all of your friends publishing theirs, and you're like, my day will come. So the lesson here is definitely perseverance, of course. And I think the other lesson that I'm taking away is that this is much more of a people business than even I think it is at times. And I hope everyone walks away with that sense of, you know, the importance of story. So yes, you need to tick all the boxes of service providers and all of the other fund formation necessities, but really remembering that the resonance is ultimately in the impact that you're making and the story that you want to tell. So thank you, Brian, so much for spending time with us. Thank you, Angela, for adding into what Brian said to reinforcements. And thank you all again for joining us here. We are going to break you up into breakouts, and if those are ready, Helen, to get some time to get to know each other. Like I said, the point of the Emerging Manager Roundtable, it really is to, to have a little bit of education, but at the end of the day, this is about community, which I think the industry certainly needs more of. So while lots of us do things that are confidential, we're all doing the same thing. So it's not really confidential at the end of the day. There's no such thing as proprietary deal flow. Every LP will tell you that. But yeah, so would love to get to know everyone a little bit better. So we're going to break you up if we are ready. And then we will come back here very briefly for me to say just a quick hello and goodbye and see you next month.